Hi everyone, it's Ichi here, and I'm back with another episode of the Tangerine Knits podcast. It is a Saturday morning for me, and I've got my iced tea, which every summer I feel like I go through a phase of remembering that I can just make iced tea at home. And I know it sounds very simple, but it's just something that I forget. So basically I had a blueberry hibiscus tea that I just brewed and then poured over ice, and there you go, iced tea. And once I remember this every season, it's like all I want to drink. So yeah, that's what I've got today. I hope that you grab your beverage of choice and grab your knitting, and I'm very excited to share what I've been knitting on. I'm wearing my first finished object, which is the Melides top by VertKnit, and I knit this using the recommended yarn, which is Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, and I use the color olive. So this is a pretty simple but elevated stockinette tank top that is constructed bottom up, and it has two different necklines. So I'm wearing it with the square neck side for now, but in the back, which you can then wear it as the front, has a V neckline as well. So it's kind of nice to have both sides as an option. I knitted this mostly as a stash busting exercise because I had these 2 extra balls of Knitting for Olive Pure Silk left over from another project, and I saw that this pattern uses very little yarn. The first 7 sizes actually call for 2 balls of the pure silk, and so that was perfect. So a little bit about the construction of the pattern. As I said, it's bottom up construction. So you start by casting on stitches for the hem, and the hem is actually linen stitch, which I'll get up so you can see it a little bit better. I haven't done linen stitch as a hem before, and I actually really enjoy it. First, the way that it looks is almost like a woven fabric, which I think is a really nice touch. And then structurally speaking, it's very stable, it doesn't stretch, and it's also not overly bulky. So compared to, say, like a double folded hem, which has 2 layers of fabric, or compared to rib, which I think on summer yarns, at least when I knit it, can sometimes look a little bit messy. I really enjoy this linen stitch hem. So that I thought was a really nice design detail. And then once you start knitting the body, there are 4 dart stitches, so 2 on each side that you knit. So that is a little bit of extra element to keep track of. And when I was knitting it, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, is this really worth it? But I will say that after the garment is finished, I do feel like, although subtle, these dart stitches really do make it look a little bit more elevated. And then there's also a little bit of waist shaping as well that results in like a very slight A-line shape that I also think looks really nice. Again, it's just another one of those really subtle but elevated details that are included in this pattern. And then, of course, when you get to the top, you're starting to do decreases to shape for the armhole, you're binding off for the armhole, and then doing each of these 4 straps. So because the 2 necklines are different, these 2 are, you bind off all these stitches in the middle and knit the straps here, whereas in the back, it's a deeper V. So you're doing decreases to get to that sloped neckline. And then lastly, the necklines and the armholes are finished off with applied I-cord. So this pattern, the designer calls it the little brother of the Melides dress, and in a similar style, it gives a lot of kind of tailoring and modification instructions. So there's schematics that show the way that the garment is constructed. It shows each of the sections and the dimensions that they're supposed to be, and it provides a lot of options to measure your body and adjust everything to fit the way that your body is shaped. So I could see that being a little bit intimidating when you first open up the pattern and there's so many pages, but I think I did enjoy reading all those details because I'm someone who generally likes to kind of modify my patterns a little bit, and this made it really easy for me to know that what I'm supposed to be measuring and what the pattern intends and how you are able to adjust that based on what you want. So one major adjustment that I had to make was not really due to the fit, but more due to my gauge. So this is a bit of a theme recently, but I have had a really hard time just meeting gauge. So I was able to meet stitch gauge, I think, more or less, but I did not meet row gauge. And at first I thought it wouldn't matter because the pattern does tell you the dimensions and the length that each section is supposed to be. So I did that for the body, and I knitted that to the longer of the options that it offers for the body, or that it suggests for the body. And then when I got to the straps, I just did what the pattern says, and the pattern gives directions in terms of increase rates based on rows. So decrease rates as we're doing bottom up. So I would say decrease every X number of rows. And of course, in that case, your row gauge really dictates how long the overall length is. And so the first time I finished the garment, I tried it on, and I realized that the straps were really tight. And moreover, the overall garment, because it was all lifted up, the overall garment was a lot more cropped than I had intended. And I think it was even more cropped than maybe what the pattern intended. Because of that, I realized that I think my row gauge is probably the culprit. And when I did measure it, lo and behold, my row gauge was like 25% smaller than what the pattern calls for, which is so dramatic. And I feel like it's something I didn't quite expect, because I felt like I was using the same yarn. If I'm meeting stitch gauge, I'm probably meeting row gauge, but evidently that is not the case. And so I basically decided to, well, step one, mope for a while, and then decide to just leave this project in a corner and not think about it, because that was a bit frustrating. But then after a while, I was kind of ready to approach it again and figured that the best thing to do is just to frog the straps and reknit that. And so I frogged all the way back down to below the underarm bind off, because I just wanted to add more length, like even more length to the body. So I knitted the body even longer, and then I made a change in how I knit the straps in terms of just recalculating the increase rates. So for example, if the pattern says to, decrease rates, I'm so not used to thinking about knitting bottom up, but if the pattern says to decrease every 4 rows, I would decrease like every 6 rows. I think I had to round a little bit because of the percentage of how my row gauge is different than the pattern gauge, but that's kind of the idea. And I read through the pattern, and it actually does give you some notes on that as well. So it offers, like, if you wanted to modify the neckline depth, she says that you can, knit more like non-decreasing rows as the simpler option, or as the quote advanced option, you can change the decrease rates. And then I ended up changing the decrease rates, which was like a little bit of extra thinking to keep in your head, but it wasn't too bad. And the straps ultimately wasn't that much fabric. So in the end, wasn't that devastating to have to redo the straps, because I think most of the fabric and most of the knitting was done in the body, So yeah, the second time though, after having, spaced out the increase rates and lengthening the straps, I think it ended up looking really well, and I really like the way that it fits. I originally thought I would mostly be wearing the V-neck in the front, but I actually quite like this square neck as well. So in that sense, it is really nice to have kind of a reversible top. And I think the overall vibe that it gives is just like elevated basic. So it ends up being really easy to wear. And I already knew that knitting for all of pure silk just feels really nice on the skin. It's very cooling, it's very smooth, and it just feels nice. So yeah, this was pretty exciting, because although I started knitting this just to use up stash, I actually really like the end result, and it kind of opens up my mind to knitting more summer garments. So maybe I'll even knit one of these in the future. I do think that it'd be nice to have this in a different color. So yeah, maybe more summer knitting is in my future, who knows? But yeah, I really do enjoy this top, and I do recommend the pattern. So while on the subject of summer garments, the next thing I want to share is more of a fixing project, but it's related because it's also a summer garment and also made out of the Knitting for All of Pure Silk. And this is the Barbroe top that I had first made last summer, but I only wore it like maybe once or twice, and I actually pulled it out recently wanting to wear it with some black trousers, actually the ones that I'm wearing now. But I just remembered that the reason I didn't really wear this was because I didn't like the way that it fit. So long story short, I had trouble meeting gauge for this lace pattern after knitting so many swatches and sizing down like at least 2 or 3 needle sizes. And ultimately the garment that I knitted was more fitted than what it seems like from the pattern pictures. So when I see other people wearing this garment, I see that the body is quite loose and the neckline cinches in a little bit, which I think counteracts how loose it is to make sure that the neckline doesn't, fall off your shoulders and looks too big. But my garment was a lot more fitted, which is more or less okay in the body because this yarn stretches a little bit and because the lace just makes it a bit of a stretchy fabric. But the neckline being pulled in just did not look flattering. It just made it look like the top was too small for me. And in fact, at first I thought that the top was just too small for me. But then upon further reflection, I was like, I think it's mostly just the straps. It was kind of bowing in a little bit. So if my bra straps were going straight up and down, this would kind of go around it, which I don't have the biggest problem with my bra strap showing, but the way that this was shaped just looked really, really messy. And I just did not ever really wear it. And I thought that was such a shame. And so I figured that it might be an easy fix to just redo the straps. And so that's what I did. I literally cut off the straps and unraveled down to the neck, which has an I-cord. and I made 2 changes when I reknitted it. So first I actually sized up for the I-cord. I'm pretty sure the pattern calls for you to knit the I-cord with the same needle, but I sized up a needle and purposely adjusted my tension, so I was knitting it very, very loosely so that the I-cord would stretch a little bit. I mean, it doesn't stretch beyond the width of the lace, but it doesn't distort the lace by cinching it in anymore either. So it's, when you stretch the I-cord, this is pretty much the same width as the rest of the lace motif. Like, it keeps it like a straight rectangle, if that makes sense. And then I kind of just kept the larger needle size for the straps, partly because, you know, of convenience, but also because, you know, the lace pattern just really gets stretched anyway once you're wearing the pattern on your shoulders. And so I figured having a little bit of extra fabric couldn't hurt. And so I did these 2 modifications and was glad to see that the neckline no longer cinches. I mean, you can even see in some of the pattern pictures that it kind of looks like this, you know, where it kind of bunches in a little bit and then everything kind of radiates out. But now it's pretty much straight up and down. And so I was glad to see that. And now it fits a lot nicely. It's more of a square neckline. Granted, I think I could have probably lengthened the straps even more, but I didn't. And I think it's, at the end of the day, like, really wearable for me now. So I thought that was a pretty worthwhile fix. I will say that it reminded me of how many ends there are to weave in on this tank top. So granted, most of the time when you have like 4 different straps, there are just a lot of ends. There's a lot of times you have to break the yarn, and so you just have a lot of ends to weave in as is, but I feel like there's even more in this case. So anyway, there was a lot of ends to weave in and not a lot of real estate in which to weave in the ends. So that was, I guess, the most like annoying part. But yeah, I'm really glad that I invested the time to do it, because now I basically have this new garment in my rotation for the price of reknitting 4 straps and weaving in a million ends. Of course, this isn't new, but I really wasn't wearing it, so this was kind of like a necessary step to take if I wanted to keep wearing it. So yeah, that is my Barbroe top, I guess, revamp project. All right. My next finished object is very exciting. So they are the Rad Radish Socks by Stone Knits. So I first saw the Rad Radish mitts like years ago and I really wanted to knit that. Finally got the yarn over the winter time, and then have been really wanting to knit these for the spring. I hadn't cast these on yet during my last episode, but since then I had been on a sock knitting kick recently, so I finished these I think relatively quickly. And basically a little bit about the pattern: it is a cuff down colorwork pattern that has 2x2 rib, all of this radish color work, and then you knit the sock body, and then at the end there's more of these like little mini radishes, which I really, really, really liked. So yeah, it is really, really cute. I did make a modification of knitting a different heel. I mean, I don't think it really matters because it's a dark yarn, you can't really see, but the pattern has you do a heel flap and gusset, but I wound up doing an afterthought heel. I think typically I opt for like a fish lips kiss heel because that's my go-to non-fussy, you don't care how it looks, but it just needs to be a nice fitting heel type of heel. But I think that when I was knitting the first sock, when I got to the part where I was supposed to start the heel, I was going to an event where I really wanted something to knit on, and I figured it would just be easy to keep knitting a tube during that event and then add the heel later on. So that's what I did. And I'm glad I did that because, you know, I was able to make some progress during that event. But I do feel like the afterthought heel, while I really like the way it looks, it is like just 2 extra ends to weave in, and you have to like pick up the heel. So, you know, it is what it is. I don't think it's like my go-to sock heel, but it is like a nice, I guess, tool in my sock heel toolbox that I can pull out when, you know, a situation calls for that. So I'm glad I was able to do that. And then something else that I did for this was ladder back jacquard, which is a way of, I guess it's for catching your floats, but without catching your floats. Basically, I wanted to do this because the last time I tried to knit colorwork socks was the Stone Knits Berry Special socks, which have these cute, like, large strawberries on them. And I think that that's basically an unfinished object. I mean, I'm just going to abandon it. The only reason I'm not frogging it is because I don't think it's worth the effort to frog it. Because, I mean, it was my fault. I knitted it way too big, and also there was pretty bad puckering on it. It was a 3-color colorwork sock, so you really needed to be patient, I think, while knitting that, and I was not in that mind state when I was knitting it. So I think I kind of should have been more careful, and I just wasn't. And also I made it too big. So I took those lessons with me. And in terms of the puckering, I wanted to address that by trying ladder back jacquard, which at first really confused me when I tried to figure that out. But once I just tried it out, it really wasn't that hard. And I think I didn't use it throughout the whole like pattern, because it works best when there's big blocks of color, but I did use it a fair amount for the radish. So you can kind of see, I put this inside out, you can see the floats. So yeah, it basically like almost forms a netting. That's a whole like different layer of fabric. Can you see that? If I'm pulling on it? I'm gonna pull on it so you can maybe see a little bit better. Yeah, it's basically like a whole mesh netting that's behind the actual pattern, and because of the way that's knit, it's completely behind and you don't see it, but it's not just individual strands that you can get your toes caught on. So I really liked that, and definitely want to keep doing it in the future. At first I was really afraid of it being visible from the front. I did try that briefly for the other pairs of socks that I knitted, and I could kind of see it in the front. And I think the way to avoid that is to knit the back very loose, like err on the side of too loose. I learned this from Suzanne O'Brien's knitting video, and that was really helpful. So I'll link that if you're interested as well. And yeah, overall, I would definitely try ladder back jacquard again. But again, it works best when there's like big blocks of color, because otherwise, you know, if it's only for 1 or 2 rows, you do the setup row and then you don't need it anymore. So you have to just join it back. So there's still a use case for stranded knitting where you catch floats by just, you know, twisting the strands, for example. So yes, I will say that the ladder back jacquard I only tried mostly on this one sock, and I think this is definitely the neater sock. There's like a little bit of puckering on this first sock. I mean, I don't really care that much. It doesn't look too bad, but this sock looks a lot nicer. So it's good to see progress at least. And the other lesson that I took from my previous failed Colorwork sock is the stitch counts and needle size that I should be using for Colorwork socks. So basically, the first time I knitted Colorwork socks, I knitted the Ova sock, which I think is still like probably my favorite sock that I've ever knitted. And at that time, I was a fairly new knitter in general, and definitely new to Colorwork knitting. So I was a really tight knitter, and I remember knitting and frogging because the Colorwork that I knitted wouldn't fit over my foot because I was knitting so tightly. And I wound up sizing up like needle sizes and sizing up stitch counts in order for it to fit over my foot. And so I tried to do that also for the Berry Special socks, but I think by that point my tension had already loosened up, so doing all of those things just resulted in a sock that was way too big and didn't fit over my foot. And so this time I realized that I should just not do all of that. And so for this pair of socks, I wound up not sizing up stitch counts. I just used the stitch count that's pretty close to my regular non-Colorwork sock stitch count. And then in terms of needle size, I actually also didn't size up needle size. I used a 2.25 needle, millimeter needle, but I used the short circulars, like the 9-inch circulars, to knit the Colorwork. And that actually also made it a really nice experience. When I knitted the Berry Special socks, I used Magic Loop, and I usually don't mind Magic Loop. I think it's quite nice, but for small like Colorwork socks, I feel like the 9-inch circulars just work so much better. It's so much smoother and way easier to avoid any laddering between like where you switch for the Magic Loop. I don't normally have issues with that for garments, but for the last sock that I tried to knit, it was just really hard, especially if you're catching floats that need to go across the part where you have to switch between needles for Magic Loop. It's really hard to make that even. So I definitely recommend using short circulars for Colorwork socks, and I would definitely do that again in the future. So yes, overall, these are super cute. I will say they're a little hot to wear right now. Like I haven't worn wool socks in quite a while because of the weather, but I think they're still really cute. And if I'm ever just wandering outside, like at night, I can slip these into Birkenstocks, and that's pretty convenient. And I am super down to knit more Colorwork socks in the future. So that's a little sneak peek. There's a couple of sock patterns that I want to knit that I'll share after I get through my whips and everything. So yes, these are my Rad Radish socks. So since the last episode, I've cast on like 3 different garment whips, and I am very excited about all of them. So the first one is the Maggie Cardigan by Petite Knit. And I'm knitting this using the Knitting for Olive soft silk mohair and merino in the color Pomegranate. So I had originally bought this yarn because I wanted to knit a Chinese New Year bright red type of sweater, but it wound up being just a little bit more muted and more rusty than I would have liked for Chinese New Year. So I ended up using a red currant as the mohair for that other sweater, and instead I decided to save this for a cardigan. And this is what I've got so far. I've knitted a good amount of the body already and then basically finished one sleeve. The way I knit my garments is typically when I get to about the length, when I'm ready to start the ribbing, I'll just put it on hold, and then once that's done, I'll block everything, check the length, and then knit the ribbing to make sure that the length is what I want, in case it grows a lot during blocking, because I just don't want to end up like unraveling ribbing and all of that. So the Maggie Cardigan is a relatively new pattern that's Petite Knit released, and I was basically like pining for it to be released. I really like the construction. I think it's called English tailoring, maybe. It's kind of similar to the poppy tee from what I can tell, in that at first you knit the back as a little mini trapezoid, then you pick up the front to knit like a small shoulder, like this, and then you end up picking up the size of this little shoulder piece to start knitting the yoke. And then it's pretty similar to like a compound raglan. So in the end, it's pretty like an interesting start, but the start is pretty quick before you get to the part where you're just knitting it similarly to a raglan. And the fit is really nice in the end because it's like a little set-in sleeve, and I really enjoy the way that looks. It just looks more like an elegant piece, and so maybe I'll try it on. Okay, so this looks a little bit ridiculous because there's needles on the body, and I don't want to end up pulling off any loose stitches, so I won't be able to like close it, but here's what it looks like so far. And I am pretty excited about it. I had really wanted like specifically a crew neck cardigan, and I feel like most of the cardigans that I see are V-necks, which looks great too, but that's just what I wanted for this. I also obviously decided to knit it long sleeve. I think in my climate, I don't really have a huge need for a short sleeve wool cardigan. I just think I'd wear it more if it was long sleeved. So I made two small modifications to the pattern. So the first is that I decided to knit this on a slightly looser gauge. So the pattern calls for you to knit it at a 23 stitch gauge using the Merino and soft silk mohair, but I decided to knit it at like a 21.5, 22-ish stitch gauge because I just felt like the fabric was plenty dense already, and then most of the other patterns for this yarn combination that I see are like in the 21 stitch gauge range, and so I just didn't want it to be like super dense. And I suspect, I don't know if that's true, but I suspect that the reason the recommended gauge is 23 stitches is more because the primary sample that she knits, the Petite knits, is in card of cashmere. So I feel like this gauge is more like optimized for the card of cashmere, whereas the soft silk mohair is like a substitution that you can make, which you can then use that gauge for. But I just didn't really want it to be any tighter, so that's what I decided to do. And because of that, I think I sized down a pinch. So basically my size and Petite Knit sizing system is really like between a small and a medium, and so I just cast on the small because I knew my stitch gauge was a little bit off, and I also wanted it to be just a tad looser fitting than what she recommends. The one thing that I also changed was that I cast on the underarm stitches according to the size medium, so the size up from the rest of the garment, so that there's a little bit more room in the body, and also that the sleeves would be a little bit wider as well, because I just really didn't want a tight sleeve. And then the other like main difference that I did was again to accommodate for row gauge. So having learned from this Melides top, I really needed to watch out for row gauge, and so I did measure row gauge in my swatch and figured that my row gauge is once again like a little bit smaller than what the pattern calls for. This time it's not as dramatic. This time my row gauge is only like 10% off, but it's still like off, and so to accommodate for that, I spaced everything out. And this time it was a little bit more complicated because, you know, you have these like increases for the back, which is a trapezoid, you have the shoulder that goes in this direction, and then you have picking up stitches on the side. And so I ended up actually doing, I think, a fair amount of calculations in my handy little spreadsheet to make sure that everything still matched up, and wherever I increase in the front, I also do the same thing in the back. And then when I'm picking up stitches along like the side of a piece of fabric, that I calculate that accordingly as well. So yes, that was a lot of effort, I think, to put in, probably, but I did it, and I think it's nice because it allowed me to get the fit that is intended. I don't know if in this case it would have been too dramatic like in this one, but I actually don't super mind doing all of that math. I just feel like being able to do that is kind of empowering also, because I could make a pattern work for whatever yarn I had in mind. So yes, I think making all those calculations essentially helped me make sure that each piece is the right dimensions, both lengthwise and widthwise, and that they all fit together. And then for the increases, like when you're knitting in like a semi-raglan type of manner, I also spaced out the increases a little bit based on my row gauge difference, and I think that was important for achieving the right yoke depth. And now, because my row gauge was not that different, I think I could have probably just like knitted the regular increase and decreases, and then at the end knitted a couple of rows without increases or decreases. But because I'm a little extra, I decided to just add the extra non-increasing rows semi-evenly throughout the section. So what that ended up being was, instead of like increasing every other row, sometimes I was adding a blank row, so that now you're increasing on the wrong side, you know? So basically, if the pattern's like increase on the right side and then don't increase on the wrong side, so you're only doing increases on the right side, if I'm adding like an extra blank row in between, I'm now having to increase on the wrong side for part of it. So, I mean, that was a little bit like annoying, but I actually didn't really mind. So yeah. And then I'm also thinking that for the front neckband, that I would do a double knitted neckband as opposed to the ribbing that's in the pattern pictures, just because I kind of like that look. And then the collar, I think I will do a ribbing. I also haven't picked out buttons for this yet. I would love to have like red buttons that match, but I'm not really sure where to go ahead and find that. So we shall see. If you have any like button recommendations for this, I am open to recommendations. Or if you have places that you like to get buttons from, I'm also open to recommendations. So yeah, that's my Maggie cardigan. My next whip is also a cardigan, and it is the Book Club cardigan by Sari Nordlund. This is a drop shoulder V-neck cardigan, and it has moss stitch sections, this nice little cable, and then diamond cable with moss stitch on the inside. And I have also been eyeing this cardigan ever since the designer started posting about it, and I have wanted to knit it ever since. I have really wanted like a cable cardigan and just looking for the right cable design, and I think this one is exactly what I want. So I knit this using the Filcolana Peruvian Highland wool in the color cinnamon, which is stash yarn. I've had this since, I think I bought this at the end of 2021. So yeah, it's been a while since I've had this yarn, and I never really knew what to do with it. And I think that this is actually so perfect for a cable cardigan. And once I knitted it up, I have just like a newfound appreciation of how beautiful this yarn is. It's one of the melange colorways, so you can see that there's some heathering. Like it generally pulls brown, but there's also like little bits of more reddish brown and then more yellowish brown. So yeah, it's just really, really pretty. Here is the swatch that I made in moss stitch. That's been blocked, and you can see just how nice that looks. So I'm really excited to have it. I think the pattern also calls for, let's see, sport weight held with a lace weight to get a worsted weight, but I think this pattern is just worsted weight. And this pattern itself is so well written. Just so many props to Sari Nordlund for having written it in this way. The way that she gives you the instructions and the charts are all just really clear to me. And it is detailed without being verbose, if you know what I mean. So for example, it would tell you to knit this moss section. It has you mark it off with stitch markers, and it has you also like mark off the other part without of the moss stitch, so that it basically like gives you a sense of what each of the sections are and gives you a guideline for what to do for each of the sections without having to say, you know, knit one, like I guess give you stitch by stitch what you're supposed to do on every single row, which is a little bit hard to follow and keep track of, you know? So for example, it would say things like, on the right side, if you see a knit stitch, you should knit a purl stitch. Whereas on the right side, like, on the wrong side, if you see this, you're supposed to knit this, for example, so that you can pretty easily tell what to do, because she gives you this rule versus like telling you what to do row by row. You know what I mean? So I really do appreciate that. And the charts are also pretty easy to follow. And I just really, really am obsessed with the way that it's turning out, and this yarn as well. So I know this is definitely going to be too hot to wear, but it's kind of nice because I'm just like not really rushing to make it. I feel like most of my making experience are enhanced when I'm not rushing towards a finished object. And so I'm just kind of enjoying the journey here and really excited by how it's going to turn out. I'm also really, really excited to use up this yarn. As you can tell, I have really been in a stash busting mood, and I really want to knit up this old yarn that's been sitting around with nothing to do. So yes. I have obviously only knit the back increases. I'm just gotten to the point where you're supposed to knit the back straight now before picking up for the shoulders. So yes, I will keep you posted on how this goes, but it's been really fun and I'm really excited about this pattern. Got 2 more whips, y'all. The next one is in a stage that's very difficult to see because the cord is scrunched. This is the beginnings of the White Mountains sweater by Midori Hirose, who is of ranunculus fame and the snow crocus and the snowy forest. She has a lot of beautiful patterns, basically. This is one of her simple sweaters that's essentially like a compound raglan that has this slightly ribbed raglan detail. And what drew me to it is 1, the stitch gauge, and 2, the fit. So let's start with why I wanted to knit this. So this is a gift that's going to be for my mom, obviously not seasonally appropriate, but I just kind of felt like casting it on. But basically, I have this Cascade 220 Sport in the color Lake Como and the Cumulus Fyberspates in the color, I think, Teal, that I got to knit a different project that didn't turn out. I wanted to knit a teal and orange cardigan, but the colors that I wound up getting just really didn't go together. And I kind of decided that it was just kind of too hard to get colors that fit, so I haven't cast that on, and basically I have this yarn out in a sweater quantity and didn't know what to do with it because this isn't really my color, but it's my mom's favorite color. And I confirmed that because I saw her recently and I brought her the swatch of this and she was like, I love this color, it's my fave. So I was like, okay, cool, I'll make something for you. And I think she just wants a basic sweater. I did consider knitting her a cardigan because I thought that might be a little bit easier to wear because I still kind of fear that it might be scratchy. She has pretty sensitive skin, and this is wool and alpaca. I mean, I don't see how she would find this itchy at all, but I don't know about the wool. I hope not, but you just never really know. But I've already cast it on, so I'm just gonna knit it like that. The fabric is really nice. It's obviously pretty thick, but it's still really fluffy. I mean, I really, really like this Cumulus Fyberspates. It just feels really dreamy. And yeah, it's at least in a color that she likes, and I hope she can at least just layer it over a shirt or something if she doesn't want to wear it next to skin, which is totally fine. But this knits up pretty thick. This is a 14 stitch gauge on, I believe, is it 4mm needles? Let's see, it is 4.5mm needles. And I think when I sized up to 5mm needles, it was 13.5 stitch gauge, so it's quite a thick gauge, but I don't think it's heavy, because most of it's fluff. It's really a sport weight yarn and a fluff. I had also considered the Doppio sweater by Sung-Hee Hong because I heard really good things about her pattern writing style, and the faux seams really appealed to me too. But then ultimately, I think I just really was drawn to the fit of this White Mountains because I think one thing that's interesting is that the sleeves start at kind of a point, like a vertex. So almost kind of like how saddle shoulders are, where it's a point. Obviously, there's no saddle shoulder that's going out in any amount. It just kind of starts like that. But it's just a different rate of raglan increasing than I've done before. So I just thought that it would be something nice to try. And it also offers so many different neck options. I just thought that would be fun. And then the yoke depth is deeper. So overall, I just thought it would be fun to kind of try it out. And obviously I haven't tried it on yet to be able to tell, but so far I'm really intrigued by the increased rates that it has for the raglan. One modification that you might be able to see is that the pattern originally calls for you to knit the neck first before continuing down, but I decided to just cast on for below the collar, partly because I can't really decide what I want the collar to be like, and also because I feel like in the pattern pictures, you can see a lot of times the neckline's really stretched out, and I feel like if I cast on using long tail cast on, then it can kind of hold its shape a little bit better, perhaps. I've seen Venetia from the Woolly Worker do this a lot recently too, so I think it's probably a good call. I will note that the neckline looks quite wide as is, so we shall see. I don't know. I think it is kind of a flattering look sometimes, but I don't really want it to be like a boat neck that goes all the way out, but hopefully when I knit the ribbing, it would cinch in just a little bit. And then I can always put an elastic as well, because I do want the fit to look somewhat classic. I think that's what my mom would like. So yeah, so far it's feeling really satisfying. It's been a pretty quick knit. I hope that I have enough yarn. If not, I guess I can always get more. Although it is always funny when you're knitting something to get it out of your stash to then have to buy more yarn for it. It just feels like a bit counterintuitive. But, you know, if that's what it takes. And I really hope that Mom likes this color. So that is my White Mountains. And on to the last whip. This will be a quick one. This is a pair of socks. It is just a pair of 2x2 rib socks, but the one, I guess, like interesting point about it is that I'm knitting a Fleegle heel for the first time. So let's start with the yarn, I suppose. So this yarn is Paton's Kroy Socks, and this color is called Mid-Century Stripes. So I had gotten this yarn as part of my Secret Santa gift exchange with actually my partner's group of friends and their significant others. And so I had asked for like colorful sock yarn and some tea. And then my Secret Santa delivered. She got me some really nice teas that I've been enjoying. And then she also got me this color. I think I just said like I like warm tones, and this is what she picked. And yeah, I'm really excited. It's kind of fun because I've never tried this sock yarn before, but I've heard such good things about it. And the colors, you know, I can't really predict how it knits up based on the way that it's wound up in the ball. But when it's knitted up, I actually quite like it. It's kind of like, it kind of reminds me of ice cream. I don't really know why. Maybe because of the pink and the white and the blue. I don't know. These just remind me of like fun colors. I am very excited to have it. I've tried it on my foot and it feels really nice. It's not been blocked yet and it does feel kind of dense. I do feel like this yarn maybe is a little bit thicker than some other yarns that I use, like the Filcolana Arwetta. I don't know if that's totally true because I don't have one nearby to compare, but that's just how it feels like. And the sock feels fairly dense. I'm knitting it on, I think, 2.5 millimeter needles. 2.25 millimeter needles. So yep, that's the yarn. And then in terms of the pattern, so basically I knew that I wanted to pick a pretty simple pattern for this yarn because obviously there are stripes. You don't want to steal the show or muddle things up with a very busy pattern. But I wanted something a little bit more than stockinette, so I went with rib. But then I also didn't want to like just knit a rib sock. So to switch things up a little bit for me, I decided to try the Fleegle heel because I know that Andrea Mowry uses it for her DRK everyday socks and her bear paw socks. And I just love the way that the heel looks. And so I wanted to try it out. And so the way I did on this is I actually have the 52 Weeks of Socks book, and Andrea Mowry has another pattern in here called the Craspedia, I think. It's a plant, and I'm not sure how to say it. And it has like baubles and all sorts of beautiful lace on it, but it's also just like a fingering weight sock that has a Fleegle heel. So I just used those instructions to knit the Fleegle heel to see if I would like it. I did the 2x2 rib, which is reminiscent of the DRK Everyday Sock, but it's not the same because I think she has you do rib on the bottom of the foot as well and over the gusset. I just didn't do that because I wasn't sure if like I would like feeling rib on the bottom of my feet. So it's a little bit different in that way, but yeah, I really enjoyed the process actually. You do still in a gusset, but there's no like picking up of stitches unlike a heel flap and gusset. So I feel like it's another one of those things that could be fun to do every now and then. I feel like with the sock heels, I just really like experiencing the different constructions. It just feels fun to like knit something in a different way. I think I will also just use this as my carrying around type of whip. So I'm not sure if I'll finish it anytime soon because also it's summer. Who needs to wear a sock in the summer? But I'm excited to have this and to try this yarn. So thanks to my Secret Santa for getting me this yarn. And also I realized as I was talking that I lied about not having another whip. I do have one more whip, which is another pair of socks. I finished one, so I guess it's also a half-finished object. Like I said, I've been really on a sock knitting kick. I don't know why I keep saying sock kicking. But this is not blocked, so it looks kind of bad. But it is the Erika sock from, again, the 52 Weeks of Socks book. So I think this is my first like proper pattern that I've knit out of that book. I used aspects of the Gersti pattern and obviously like the heel from the Craspedia pattern from that book, which is really like inspiring to like look at, but I don't know, haven't gotten to a lot of it, but I really, really love the way that the Erika socks look. I wanted to knit a pair of red socks for Chinese New Year, didn't get to it, and then now I think I just want a red sock for daily life, and so I knit this one. And this is knit cuff down as well with a pretty long hem, or I guess cuff, but I made the slight modification of using twisted rib instead of the regular rib just because I thought twisted rib looks like really dainty and nice, so that's what I opted to do. And then these leaf motifs look kind of like hearts, kind of like leaves. You just knit that like continuously all the way down. It has a heel flap, but I made the other modification of doing I think it's called the Eye of the Partridge heel flap. And I'm pretty sure it's just honeycomb brioche because, again, I just wanted to try it out. And also there were a couple of honeycomb brioche projects that I wanted to try, and I wanted to see if I liked doing this stitch because I know it's kind of notoriously difficult to tink back and frog. And I will say I did mess up on the honeycomb brioche, and I tried to fix it many times, and then I tried to block it to see if my laddering was just an issue with the blocking, and it did not fix it. When you knit it correctly, it's gorgeous, but basically, like, I had knitted it, messed up, and then I, like, blocked it, and then I unraveled that to re-knit it, and so I think right now the yarn, from having been blocked in the wrong position, still looks pretty, just, like, off-kilter. I feel like it's on the back of the heel. It probably doesn't matter too much, and I also kind of have some level of faith that after blocking again, it might look a little bit nicer, because the weird kinks in the yarn from when I first blocked it will hopefully go away. But yeah, the pattern I think just has like a garter heel flap. So yeah, that's what I decided to try. It does take longer, obviously, because, you know, as with any brioche, you're slipping stitches, so you knit more rows than needed. I also knitted this a little bit longer, I think, than what the pattern called for, because I just kind of eyeballed how big my arch is by measuring from the middle of my ankle bone to the bottom of my heel. So I think this heel is still maybe a little bit larger than need be, but I tried it on and it fits fine, so I'm not complaining. But that is the other modification that I made. This one, I will say, is hard to knit on unless you're like really having dedicated time, because there are 3 separate charts that you have. There's like a separate chart for the middle motif and then the side motifs, and then the number of rows don't match up. So for example, you could be finished with the middle motifs chart, but then like in the middle of the other motifs chart. So you really have to keep track of which row you're on, which is just a little bit harder to do. I think I could probably just combine everything into one chart and do it that way, but then I think you'd end up having a chart for like half of the sock. So I haven't done that. I've just been kind of keeping it in my head, but because of that, it's not something I can just like pick up and knit. But the result is beautiful. I love this yarn. The yarn is Lang Yarn's Jawoll, I think is how you would say that, and it feels really nice. I think this might be too early to say because I haven't really worn either this nor my Rad Radish socks, both of which are mostly knit up using the Jawoll, but it feels just like, it's not scratchy, it's soft, but it's also like, it feels like wool, you know? Like, it's not rustic, but it feels like wool, if that makes sense. And so it's just a texture that like really feels nice to me. So that is my Erika sock. And on the topic of socks, I wanted to share 2 sock patterns that were kindly gifted to me by the designers, which I'm so grateful for. Nobody like asked me to talk about it or pay me anything to talk about it, so I'm just sharing it because I think they are cool patterns and I want to share that with you all as well. So the first pattern is the Wildflower Bloom Socks by Mishi Fraz Knits, and she reached out saying that she saw that I had wanted to knit that teal and orange flower motif cardigan, which although that didn't work out, she thought that her pattern might be of interest, and it definitely was. So as you can see, I'll put up a picture. It's I think she has a cowl pattern as well, but it has these big like organic looking flowers on it, which I really think is different because a lot of other like flower motifs that I see are like more regular, you know, but this one just feels really organic. And I haven't knitted it yet, obviously, but I looked through the pattern and it has different charts for each different size so that you get like a pretty seamless pattern on whichever size sock that you need. So I thought that was a really nice touch and a lot of detail that goes into making a sock pattern. And keeping with the teal and orange theme, I actually already have these 2 yarns in stash. I had knitted other socks with them, so these are leftovers from the 100 grams. And these are both Malabrigo Ultimate Sock, and this is the color Wabi Sabi, and this is the color Caramel, or Caramel, depending on how you say that. And I feel like this would look awesome with the teal as the main color and then the orange as the flowers. I feel like these 2 teal and orange colors actually mesh a little bit better together than the other 2 that I had picked that were both like so bold. And these, I think, yeah, are much closer in the color palette. So I really, really want to knit the Wildflower Bloom socks, and that's probably one of the next Colorwork socks that I will want to knit when I'm ready to knit another Colorwork sock. So thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing your beautiful pattern. I'm really excited to knit it. And another really cute Colorwork pattern is by Les Nids de la Linotte. I don't speak French, so I apologize that I'm saying this not in the proper way, but the pattern, I think it's called La Cerise sur la Gâteau. So this pattern has 3 sizes and it's a cuff down sock with the cute little cherry motif at the top. I really like the little white highlight that's included on each of the cherries to make them look a little bit more like 3-dimensional and lifelike. And I like the, again, organic shape of the leaves as well. That looks really cute. I'm going to share a little bit of details from the pattern page. It says that it is a cuff down sock with a reinforced heel and a classical toe. The color work is knit over 12 stitches and you can adapt the cuff height according to your yardage and play with colors for heels, toes, and stripes. So it has a main strand and 2 contrasting colors. They're using the green for the stripes and the red for the cherries and the heel and toe. So yeah, another really, really cute pattern. So thank you so much, Linotte, for sharing this pattern with the world and gifting me a copy. I really, really appreciate it. So then other than that, in terms of other acquisitions, I have none, which I am very proud of myself. I have been tempted many a times to buy more yarns because there's always another pattern that I really want to knit, another sweater I'd love to have, another color I'd love to try. So yeah, there's an endless amount of knitting that I would like to do, but I'm just trying to be better at acknowledging that time is finite and I am finite. I cannot do every single thing in the world. And that's not meant to be a limiting mindset. That's more like an encouragement to really prioritize what's really important and pour myself into those as opposed to trying to do a million things and stressing myself out over it, you know? So my 3 whips are all like not really that near to be finished. So I really want to focus on those for sure. And also I'm just thinking about other patterns that I can knit using the yarn that I already have. So again, I was stash diving and found some pretty old stash. This is Barocco Comfort DK in the color Pine or Spruce or something like that. It's like a deep green color. And this is before I realized that I liked wool. I thought for sure that I would be sensitive to wool because that was my experience with store-bought clothes. But of course now I love knitting with wool and mohair when I can choose like what yarns I use and the quality of those yarns. But this is 50% nylon and 50% acrylic. So it's not really something that I ever really knit with. I think I originally bought it for like a wrap top or something like that because I thought I'd like the color and the color didn't turn out to be what I expected anyway. But I was just thinking like, is there something I can do with this? I have about maybe 600 or 700 yards of this and I knitted up 2 swatches just to see. And I don't know, I feel like obviously like my store-bought clothing are not all natural fibers, but I do like natural fibers a lot more than I think acrylic and nylon. And I'm just debating whether it's worth like knitting something out of this just to get this out of stash versus like maybe just destashing it and donating it to someone who would want to use it. Because at the end of the day, even though the yarn is like free because I already have it, like I still have to invest time into it. The one contender of a pattern that I was thinking of is maybe the Sabai top by Suzanne Mueller because it seems like a pretty simple top and I think this would look fine with it, but I just feel like I would like that pattern more if I knitted it using like a cotton linen type of fabric than this. So that is TBD. I'm not sure if I'm going to knit with this or not. And then I've just gotten into a lot of like winter or fall garment planning. There's a lot of patterns that I've been eyeing, and therefore like I want to buy the yarn for it, but I'm just trying really hard to finish at least one or two things that I'm already working on before buying more yarn, because like I feel so proud whenever I'm able to like get a yarn out of stash, but then if I just buy the same amount back, then there's actually no difference in the amount of yarn that's sitting at my house. So yes, I am making the commitment to myself that at least until I finish my Maggie cardigan, I'm not going to buy any more yarn. Yes, I think that would be smart to do. So yes, that is it for today. Thank you so much for sticking to the end. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate if you could give this video a like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And once again, thank you so much for spending time with me. It really is an honor. It means a lot. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everyone.